Zvuk Misli.
Podcast Instituta za filozofiju i društvenu teoriju.
Hi everyone, my name is Filip Balunovic and this is another episode of podcast of the Institute of Philosophy and Social Theory, University of Belgrade, The Sound of Thought. Our today's guest is an Iranian feminist and activist, Firoozeh Farvardin. She's a postdoc fellow at the Rosa Luxemburg and a member of International Research Group on Authoritarianism and guest lecturer at Humboldt University. Some of the themes and topics we have covered in this episode include the recent mobilizations in Iran, mainly the feminist ones in 2022, but also the history of Iran, social and political dynamics in that country, the consequences of the Iranian Islamist Revolution. Firoozeh, welcome to Belgrade.
Thank you very much for having me here. I'm very delighted to be in Belgrade and, of course, in your podcast.
Okay, thank you so much. Let's start a little bit from the general context. You come from Iran and your writing focuses on Iran, yes, on feminist mobilizations in that country. But let's just for our viewers and listeners start from the general context, and I will just pose this really general question about how Iran looks like today.
Thank you for your very simple but at the same time hard question to answer. It really depends from whom you're talking about, from the eyes of Iranians or from the eyes of the outside Iran, also diaspora. I would say that it's a very different answer I have if I want to talk about what is the state of affairs from inside Iran. That, of course, right now we are facing a complete coercive authoritarian regime that kind of got all the possible ways of the reform blocked us. But at the same time, we are facing a society that is always, it has been ups and down, and it was dynamic, not only during the past 45 years, but in general, I would say that in the long history of the territory that we know as Iran, at least the modern time, it was always the protests and struggles happening. At least we had, before this revolutionary momentum of 2022, we had two major revolutions, one in 1905, constitutional revolutions, and another one in, as you may know, Islamic Revolution or 1979 revolution. So I would say that it's always very dynamic societies, and it is not easy to just talk about repression, but it's important to also reflect on this parts of struggles that we always kind of dealing with, and we are waiting for the next round of protests for sure.
But can you provide a little bit of now historical, you started with this historical, or you mentioned two important historical dates, and then this 1979 and the Islamic Revolution in Iran was really a turning point, not only for Iran, but in general, globally. This is considered to be one of the most important years in terms of transformations, again, not only in Iran, but in more general terms, of course. Can you just tell us a little bit about this transition from the rule of Shah, from a country which was a close ally of the United States, also quite close to the Western, but at the same time super corrupt. And then we know, I know from the studies of radical left-wing movements in Germany and Italy that actually one visit of Shah to Berlin in the late 60s turned out to be a turning point And then things that are happening on the streets of Tehran and other cities in Iran actually happened in Berlin. The anti-Shah protests ended up with one killing of one protester. And by chance, Ulrike Meinhof was there, and then we know the rest of the story with RAF and the mobilizations in Germany. But how that transition looked like? So from a country which was corrupt, which where social and economic differences were huge, privileges were really close to the ruling, let's say, family. From 1925 onwards, there was one family in power. What were the hopes of Islamic revolution? Was it clear from the very beginning, from 1979, that it's going to turn out like this?
No, for sure, it was not clear how would be the direction, like all the revolutionary momentum or revolutions that are happening all around the world. But I was born after revolution, so I was not engaging in that, spaces of hope or the affective driven politics of hope. But based on reading and based on my experience of my family, I know that there was a hope, and I would connect it with this global imaginary of the better future, this hopefulness that is coming from one side, from the Marxism that was prevailed also at the time in Iran, and this kind of linear account of history that the future would be better than the past. That I would say that is really affective driven politics, both for the Islamist oppositions and also for the Marxist leftists, that were really the dominant discourse they have. I mean, both Islamist and Marxist. But at the end, we also have the political Islam that, as you said, that is a turning point in a sense that it was the first time the revolution based on the idea and imaginary of the another possible world, that is Islamic world or an Islamic society, come and dominate the society. And I think it's a turning point in the Middle East, in the region that I come from, and it's kind of give birth to other Islamist movement in the region, and the beginning of the end of the leftist Marxist movement and struggles in the region. So it was a kind of a domino effect everywhere, that a kind of course, the effect of the West also very important, and imperialist intervention. But anyhow, the domino effect was that wherever that the Islamists got more power, then of course the leftist and progressive forces set back, and it was the history of the region for the past 45 years. I would say that.
How did that happen? You say that that the Islamist revolution was not, of course, only about political Islam, but also about the progressives or the left-wing Marxian movements, and we all know these images from the Iran after the revolution. So women were not obliged immediately to wear hijab. Then we have the introduction of this obligatory of law that makes wearing hijab obligatory. What were and as you said, the Iranian political and social image is super complex, and it's super complex among other things because the dynamics functions in waves, so it hasn't always been like this since 1979. When the law that obliges women to wear hijabs became so strict,
well, actually, it happened right after revolution. So the first law that passed, or the first order of the supreme leader Khomeini, was to kind of limited the access of the women without hijab in the public offices. So it's come right after revolution. I think 8 days after revolution. The first two order was one, the obligatory hijab in the governmental offices, and the second, kind of annihilation of the family protection law that was more or less a kind of progressive law at the time in the last decade of the Shah era. And it shows that how it is important for the new government or new establishment government to shows that they are offering something completely new and kind of, in a sense, in relation to the request or the demands of the, I would say that not majority, but those fraction of the populations that they're kind of the subject of this whole idea and ideology of political Islam. So the Islamic imaginaries, that is, of course, it was also have the component of social justice, was very important. Anti-imperialism was very key for this discourse to get popularity, because in the collective memory of Iranians, the coup against the Mossadegh government, I think in 1953, was very, very essential to understanding the imperialist intervention in the country. So it was there alive, and the ones that could represent or demand to represent this anti-colonial, anti-imperialist tendencies of the society at the time was Islamists. So they used the social justice that got from the Marxist with this and also anti-imperialist discourse from the left, and then combine it with the very powerful and messianic aspect of the political Islam about the future and visions for the better future for the Islamic society. So I think it was, in this sense, very powerful imaginary.
But when did it become so so tense with the police controlling wearing of hijabs on the streets?
First of all, it's important to note that the first protest against Islamic Republic come from the women. So the first organized protest on the streets was around 8th of March, that in many cities, including Tehran, but was not limited just in Tehran, women got together and protest against these new orders that I told you about, the limitation of the access of the women without hijab in governmental office and public spaces, and also family protection law, banning of the family protection law. So basically, it was the first major protest, and thousands of women from different fractions of the society, even by hijab, they had the hijab, but they come and kind of protest against this law. But of course, they didn't have that much support of the other groups and organizations, particularly leftist organizations, I would say that at the time. And the reason was that for many leftist anti-imperialist groups, it was the secondary issues. And at the same time, not only it was secondary issues, but at the same time, they also have this belief and image that the women without hijab are the symbol of the westernized world and the symbol of the consumerism. So they were, in a sense, discursively also not pro the issues of the, what women on the street demands of the, right of their bodies and not to having the compulsory hijab. So in a sense, I don't want to put all the blames to those that actually suppress, that is are also leftists and other organizations, liberal as well, nationalist, liberal, other groups. But I think they also have the role, in a sense, that not supporting enough the women's in their cause, that is actually showing the best, at best, how limited the imaginary of the 1979 revolutions for the, better future, for the emancipatory politics and for the social justice. And I think it was a very key turning point. And as far as I know, based on my historical research, many of these women later on, if they survive, they kind of come out of their organizations in kind of protest because of the situation. I think.
But how come it doesn't come, at least to me, as a surprise that actually somehow women in Iran were central objects of In the 50s, if I'm not mistaken, Pahlavi government banned wearing hijab.
It's before that.
Even before.
Yes.
And then after the revolution, again, women were the main target, with obliging them or enforcing this law, obligation of wearing hijab.
Yeah, I mean, yes, but I want to comment on that. I don't know any places or any countries or any nation state in the history of the nation state that gendered bodies and particularly women's body were not at the center of the policies and politics. In relation to Iran, I think is of course the hijab issue, obligatory hijab or banning hijab, is central, but different context would be different issues that become centralized in terms of the state project and in terms of the imaginary of the imaginary and ideology of the state in general. So Iran is also, like other countries, has centralized in this issue. But I would like a bit talk about hijab as what I understand hijab, what is the hijab is, our obligatory hijab. So of course, it is very important in terms of the appearance, in terms of the limitations of our kind of imposing dress codes on the bodies, just because of there are different sexual orientation or sexual or sex. But at the same time, first of all, it is not just limited to the women's. I would like to talk about feminized bodies in a sense, and at the same time this kind of dress codes, obligatory dress codes, and somehow was also for men as well. So there was of course the level of the suppression was different, but it is not limited to the just woman as woman that we know, biological woman. Another issues that I think is more important is that for me hijab is a very complex mechanism of suppressions that bring about other form of policings of the bodies and societies. The main example for me is the issues of public segregation, spatial segregation that coming with the hijab. So if you want to be in a safe space or you want to not to have hijab properly, then you can have your space, but it's segregated. So it was an excuse for segregating many of the public spaces in 1980s, including educational spaces, schools, higher schools, universities. Many of universities at the beginning of the revolution was segregated and separated between male and females. And so I would say that it is more than just dress code. It is a way of policing the society and populations based on the issues of hijab. But at the same time, I think it's an ideological component of the Islamic Republic too, or it's become this ideological importance during the time, because at the beginning of revolution, this idea of the better future or social justice was very important, and they tried to kind of integrate some of the population based on this idea, and there was some sort of the pseudo welfare state was in Iran at the time. So in a sense, they also talk about Islamic economy, Islamic lifestyle. So it was very diverse way of putting that how we are Islamic society that we imagined before. But
which is put in a direct opposition to the Western, as you mentioned before.
Yeah, the Western. Yes, so it's a non-Western.
To consumerism.
Yeah, exactly. So they kind of frame it as if anti-capitalist society. That is
anti-imperialist, anti-colonial.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But in reality, it was not. But it was not that much vivid at the beginning, I would say that, or at least for the most of the population. But time passed, and then particularly after end of the war, 1988, war with Iraq, that they started to adopting structural adjustment policies and consulting with IMF and World Bank, and the economic reform start in Iran. So basically, they kind of give up the idea of the Islamic economy, and in terms of the idea of the exporting revolution, because at the beginning they were that much radical that they want to also export the revolutions to other part of the region or the world, they kind of set back from this idea, and they were more into dealing and being more pragmatic to kind of work with the West rather than being confronting with that, or at least the general tendency was that. So in this kind of new constellation, the only things that become the symbol of the Islamic society was issue of hijab. So it's become the icon of symbolically and the icon of Islamic rule. There is nothing like hijab could represent this image, this imaginary of the Islamic society that they had in mind. And I think it's very important that to understand then why, if you kind of challenge this obligatory hijab, how you challenge the whole system as a whole, as a status quo as a whole, because it's all the ideological power is based on this very idea of the obligatory hijab. Mm-hmm. And this gives the movement that happening 2 years ago a very strong movement, in a sense, that shaking the foundation of the Islamic Republic, I would say that.
Mm-hmm. How did the economic crisis in the mid 2000s, then afterwards Iran is facing for years the sanctions by the U.S. And the global situation in geopolitical terms is of course spilling over to the economy. And you write about neoliberalism in Iran as well, and how that affects primarily women. Can you tell us a little bit more about this economical aspect?
Yes. I don't know, maybe I should start from the uprising to come back to that, or you prefer to I will talk about this, because I think it's connected. And
yeah, certainly.
So the uprising happened in September 2022, and it was very, very nationwide, in a sense that at the peak of the uprising, we had 160 cities involving in the revolutionary movement.
We're talking about uprising, which was triggered by the assassination of the Kurdish actors.
And then
Kurdish Iranian.
Yes. The triggering event of such a big protest movement was the state femicide of the Kurdish woman in Tehran, not in her hometown. That is also, I think, is important. By the morality police, or hijab police, as we know, that under custody, she got repeatedly beaten, and unfortunately, she went to the coma, and some days later, she passed away, or she was killed by the Islamic Republic's police. So it is the triggering events that give birth to the very huge, and I think it's the biggest round of the mobilization in Iran, not only in the past 40 years, but I think in general, I don't recall any other movements that kind of expanding from the north of the country until, to the south. And in 160 cities, that is, for me, is very massive numbers. And the questions for me was that if it is the triggering event is about the obligatory hijab, why it's happened right now and not any other time in the history of the, I would say, that kind of gender apartheid regime in Iran, and in the history of the suppression of the different marginalized groups, including women and gender dissidents. So I try to answer these questions by kind of connect my previous works about neoliberalism to the event that unfolding in Iran. I believe that adding to the gender suppression in Iran, that is ideological and political, we also have the neoliberalization process in Iran that started right after war, as I said that, but finding a new kind of qualitative character in the past, I would say that 15 years, that somehow connected or at least I argue that connected to the sanctions against Iran as well. So it's not, I would say that I'm not limited this because of the sanctions, but sanctions has a rule to help the Islamic Republic to find the excuse for further neoliberalizations, further cutting the social services and also privatizations in a very harsh level that we haven't had before. So basically, economic situation, economic hardship in the past 15 years pushed the government toward introducing a new so-called economic plan. They call it economic plan, but basically it was more than economic plan that they called resistance economy. That, in my opinion, was nothing but a kind of resilience theory, neoliberal resilience theory to kind of how to resilient the situations that we are suffering, and how to, with further neoliberalizations and kind of unburden the state from its task, we can have, kind of regulate the society better and control and manage also economic and political unrest. So in this sense, and why then it's related to what's happening in the 2022, is that in this resistance economic package and following that population policies and recent gender policies of the Islamic Republic, women have the main role for this task of unburdening the state. Why? Because one part of the state policies is kind of encouraging family-based unit as the unit of entrepreneurship. So family is not just the values for the populations or having more babies, but also in terms of helping the society to sustain the situation, sustain life, and reorganizing work in general. And for this, I think women's bodies are the most important to consider. We then face, first of all, kind of push back women more onto home in the excuse of the, family-based units, and there are basically more women-friendly works than women's push back home. Then we have these population policies.
Are they pushed from the public sector also in order to provide these famous neoliberal cuts in spending?
Exactly. And then informalization of the works happening, because these family-based units were kind of the exempt from the general, regulating law, labor law in Iran. So basically they were more into the informal sector. And what we are facing is the feminization of the informal market, that is half of them are women's, and then also defeminization of the market. And considering that Iranian women are very educated, and more than 60% of the people's arriving to university each year are women, you can imagine how would be hard and unrealistic that thinking of 60% of women graduated each year as professionals, but there is no job for them, and it was never translated to the realm of the labor, realm of the employment, and they were forced to stay at home and doing informal works. So basically unpaid works and paid works, but in the realm of the family. So in this sense, this regulatory aspect of familialism, I would call it, but previously I called neopronatalism, was very important. So it's not just about having more babies, or the issues is not just, the populations, but more importantly, how to deal with the consequences of the further neoliberalizations, and how unburden the task of a state for giving these services, and this cut that happening in the realm of education, in realm of the health, in realm of the reproducing life, the realm that we call it realm of life, everyday life. And in this sense, women in Iran particularly after post-pandemic, that also many cuts happen, and many of the women lose their job, nothing to lose, and I think they had many reasons to revolt. And it is a combination of both ideological, political, and more importantly, economical situations that led to this happen.
And in your view, how successful is the movement in putting all these issues together? What is most visible, at least from the outside, is that women in Iran, especially in the light of what happened in 2022, we know the images of young women usually burning their headscarves. And as you said, in a way, Iran was formatting itself after the revolution in opposition to the West. And then you said that apart from hijab policy, there were other Islamic economy, etc. But then you say, okay, Iran is not anymore in opposition to the West with respect to economy. It's neoliberalism. It's not in it. And you mentioned something that is crucial, I think, is that hijab remained like a symbol of distinction between Iran and the rest of the world. So the feminist movement and the women mobilizations are really facing a difficult task, which is to address or tackle or challenge both the symbolic notion embodied in hijab, but also many social and economic problems that they have been facing in the light of neoliberalization. How successful is the movement in putting all these things together?
So for answering this question, I should also say something about the previous wave of the protest in Iran. It's otherwise it's not complete. So since the beginning of this first phase of the neoliberalization in Iran, that is in 90s, we are facing some protests and revolts. So peoples that suffer from the new structural adjustment policies here and there come and brutally suppressed. So we had this kind of wave of protests particularly in the suburbs and ghettos and in the small cities that brutally suppressed, and many of them we know about them very late after it happens, because at the time there was no also social media or alternative media that we can learn about that. But I would say that there was a kind of same issues related to the economic issues there, very beginning. And then we have another type of the protest that happening about democratic rights, citizenships, who has the right to choose and elected, that is coming with the Green Movement. If you heard about that, that is more in the central part of Iran and in big cities, happened in 2009, that it was happened after the election 2009. And then we also have the issues that is also one of the main I would say that along with the gender questions, very important issues to address is the issues of the ethnic national minority in Iran. And they were always also part of political discontents in Iran and contentious politics in Iran. And so famously Kurdish question or Kurdish movement in Iran, those were very successful and very powerful, I would say that. But we also have other movements from the Baluchistan, from the Arab minorities, from the even Turkish minorities, that they time to time also have the protest because of their rights and because of the situation that they suffered.
And how are those protests treated by the authorities? Is it the same level of brutality?
No, I would say that sometimes even worse, because of course being as a marginalized part of the society, of course it is easier, and with nationalistic ideology it's easy to find an excuse to suppress other voices or kind of hide the brutality that happened to them, particularly in Kurdistan and Baluchistan and Khuzestan, that is the the Arab minority lives, most of the time the suppression was very brutal in the past 40 years, but it was not just in the time of the Islamic Republic. Before that, we also witnessed the atrocity by the Shah's state against the minority. So we have the national minority issues, we have the gender discrimination, gender inequality issues. We also have the very powerful, at the time of the 1917 revolution, a working movement, workers' movements that, of course, suppressed some of them officially observed into the official trade unions, but many of them also suppressed. And then in the late 2000s, around 2000, we also witnessed of the kind of rebirth of this workers movement in Iran, that they also organized some protests, some strikes, a nationwide strike that we had, I don't remember exactly the time, but I think 2018 in Iran, that we had a nationwide strike of the trucks drivers, and some kind of less expanded but in locally important strikes of the workers, particularly in the oil refinery area. And so we have these different levels of the protests and contentious that is happening. But the point that I think is very important regarding a 2022 incident or momentum, I don't know how to right now call it, because it's retrospectively looking at it, it seems for me it's not movement, more memento. Gender issue, in a sense that I explained it, about that how hijab is a kind of more than just the issues of, or gender violence is more than just issues of the gender equality, but rather addressing the very base and the foundation of the Islamic rules and the issues of colonization of the life in different aspects. It is also extractivist of the vital resources, but also controlling, monitoring any other way of life, of habitus of the people, to control them. In a sense, it's like a colonizations.
But talking about the way of life, what I know from some rare people I know who visited Iran is that not everyone's lives are equally affected by the law. And I would introduce a class issue here. Are the wealthier more capable of kind of not running away, but being able to do things that are forbidden after some hour at night or in some special occasions? Is that true?
Yes, is it true? I just want to give an example about the hijab itself, because we had a very debated discussion even among the feminists for a long time. I think it was started from the late 90s at the beginning of the 2000s, whether issues of hijab is a kind of very middle class request or demands, and it's not or whether it is also the issues of the working class, for example, that we are talking about hijab, or maybe we should just addressing the very basic needs of the peoples and working class women's. But the issues that sometimes is forgotten to many of this discussion is that actually the ones that is the most affected by this obligatory hijab issues are the working class women. Why? I think I can give you an example, as you also mentioned. So basically, if you have your own car and you are not using public transport for going to work, so the chance of getting arrested is really less. It doesn't mean that you are not having or facing the discriminations, but you might have less chance of the affected. Second, you're, for example, you got arrested and now you should pay a fine for that. Who can pay the fine? Of course, it is harder for the working class to pay the fines. And if it is repeatedly happen, basically it's not possible.
You're talking about a hypothetical situation in which a woman is driving.
Going public transport. For example, using public transport and got arrested because they didn't have hijab.
Okay, yeah.
And then for coming out of the jail or prison, she has to pay.
Yeah.
And then how could it possible? And it's of course is now increasing their fines for arrest and then.
And how much is a fine?
To be honest, I don't know, because it's now with inflation, it's of course rising, and I'm not living in a country, but it is something. So I would say that at the time, 1/10 of your minimum salary, okay. I would say that at the time. I don't know right now, because one of the ways that now they are using the obligatory hijab law is now that to really drastically increase exponentially the fines, and then it's make it even hard for the middle class to also go without hijab outside, because after 10 times you got arrested, basically you cannot continue in this way. And I'm talking about hypothetical situation.
Is it a common thing that you regularly, whenever you go out to the street, for instance in Tehran or in some other big cities, is it a common thing that you see a woman or a number of women without wearing?
Yeah. The last time that I was the country was before the uprising, and I really got surprised of the number of the people that were still not using hijab. But again, I think at the time, I don't know about now, I have different stories. At the time, it was very limited to big cities and some part of the cities. But then after revolution, it's become very more popular, and in many places happen. The other is interesting things that happen that I talk with many doing interview is that many women that believe in Islamic rituals or following the Sharia in a sense, now they are not using hijab as a way of practicing Islam. So they kind of intentionally unveil themselves to kind of protest against or distance themselves from the government, from the state. It doesn't mean that they necessarily don't believe in the personal following this rule, but they don't want at all to be seen in the eyes of others as supporter of the regime.
Mm-hmm. So they might be religious.
Yes, religious. There is no connections necessarily between being religious and having hijab or not having hijab. Okay. And there are more actually scholars, female scholars, Islamic scholars that now writing about, talking about and advocating about that there is no direct connection with the religious belief in Islam and having hijab, obligatory hijab or something imposed by the state. So this is another discussion. I would say that the things is not, I'm not expert about the religious issues and I don't want to kind of intervene in that realm. But the point is, we should distinguish the issues that unfortunately many times is kind of, particularly outside Iran, kind of mixed up with the issues of the Islam as a religion and kind of fit this kind of anti-Muslim, I prefer to use anti-Muslim racism rather than Islamophobia here in particularly in Europe and North America. Mm-hmm. So I think it is also important to raise these issues as I think our audience basically are here.
Mm-hmm. Okay, before we make a transition to the flip side of the coin and start talking about the situation in Europe and the issue of hijab in Europe, I wanted to ask you one more question with respect to the reaction of the authorities in Iran. We know that immediately in the post-revolutionary months or years, people were getting arrested, being accused of counter-revolutionary activities, etc. And I assume that one of the accusations towards people who oppose the regime is that they are foreign agents or or traitors, right? And then in that light, how does that function? I know you haven't been in Iran since 3 years ago, if you said in 2021.
Yes.
How is the situation after the death of the president of Iran? Did the have the authorities gained more ground for,
Suspicious regarding?
Exactly.
I mean, it's really not a realm of that I
Yeah.
know about that or talk, but I don't think so. That is something in this sense change. And in general, these issues of the spies, I mean, of course, I don't have any direct informations, but as far as I see, and from those that I know that were for a while arrested and captured by the Islamic Republic, is most of the time is kind of new empty accusations just for bargaining from the West, and you kind of a scapegoat to kind of negotiate to get more upper hand in the deals, and particularly when it's come to the nuclear deals or other stuff. So far, I never heard that. I mean, I think with the improvement of technology and the surveillance technology and other stuff, it's really, for me, it's not acceptable to believe that when they want to do the spies, I don't think that they use the persons as for example, high-rank scholars or, I don't know, scientists to go in the country to do the spy. So that's why I frame it more in this sense. And but I
watched a very good TV series that tells the opposite.
So I'm sure that everywhere there is a conspiracy theory everywhere, but I prefer not to feed this kind of the way of seeing the reality of the world. But
how
it
is
is
diaspora?
true.
How are you? How is Iranian diaspora treated? So I assume there are people who live in the West who can go back to Iran, and people who live in the West who cannot go back.
Well, it's very arbitrary. I mean, there is no restrict law or written regulations that who can go and who cannot go. As far as I know, according to the law, I have the right to enter the country, and nobody can, kind of block me to go in the country. And of course, it's true, I can travel to Iran, but who knows when I can come out of Iran. So that's their kind of risk calculations that many decided to not go for a while, the country or the time of the things. But time of the, for example, unrest or something happened, particularly if you are double citizens, it is an issue. But it is very arbitrary, I would say that. That's why it's you never know what's happening or not happening. But the things that I want to raise about this kind of sometimes rightful suspicious of the Iranians inside Iran regarding the oppositions and regarding the diaspora. And I think there was this really, really serious gap between the things that frame outside Iran as a diaspora that is also itself is very not homogenized, it's very heterogeneous group of people, powerful elites, I would say that. And inside Iran's that peoples that are either pro-regime or against regime inside Iran. And the moment of the revolution was an occasion that we had this chance to kind of fill this gap. But I would say that the diaspora were not successful in do this and to really representing what's happening inside Iran and to embodied the situation. And one of the things that we suffer now is that this widening gap between inside and outside, and it is not feeling by social media with satellite, despite all the energy and effort that many grassroots do outside country to make it possible. But because the dominant oppositions close to Western governments have the upper hand, it was very hard to connect with the grassroots inside.
Mm-hmm. May I ask you another question that you also don't, at least in the writings in your writings I had the chance to read, you didn't touch upon, but there is something. I believe that people from abroad usually know about Iran things through culture and cinematography, movies, whether fiction or documentaries. So Iran, in my view, has a super rich cultural production. How's the situation with culture within the country? And are the restrictions? I assume they're applying to the sphere of culture as well.
Yes.
But how harsh? How is it at least in the field of culture possible to kind of navigate a little bit more freely?
Well, currently, unfortunately, no. There is pure suppression and coercion happening now. That is, from the eyes of the state, understandable that they should kind of limit and blockade all possible way of transgression, I would say that. And of course, the realm of culture and cultural products are very important. But at the same time, we still have some opaque, invisible spaces that allow us to do stuff that we want to do, or kind of
Within the country.
Within the country, okay. Actually. The kind of underground life of the people from many different part of the society, in different part of the countries, that they have their own cultural, social life. And actually, if I return to the question of the uprising, I would say that many of these spaces that I call them alternative reproductive spaces, that including not only, for example, communitarian kitchens, kind of women-based daycare, help to children's, and also it includes this kind of cultural spaces, alternative, autonomous, informal spaces that kind of flourished in the past decades in Iran as a center of the resistance. They are the spaces that make it possible, the condition of possibility, what's happening in 2022, and a kind of coordination of the events, because you cannot have such a massive protest all around the country without having any kind of a coordinations. And my idea is that these kind of alternative spaces are very important role, and there are some of them focusing on cultural issues, for example, for the rights of the minorities to educate in their own language. So they have their alternative schools for educated students in learning the Kurdish language, Arabic language. So this is the spaces that resistance possible, and the women's and gender dissidents has the key roles in this kind of the alternative spaces. And I think the state knows that, and it is the reasons that the recent kind of the wave of the arrests and those that sentences to the long imprisonment in the recent months are mainly this activists working on these spaces in this, alternative bookshops, alternative library, in environmentalist collectives, local collectives that kind of try to educate locals about the issues of the climate change, for example. So these are the spaces that resistance is real happening in that country.
Mm-hmm. Since 2022, do you think, or do you feel that enthusiasm is now going through a downfall, or taking that the price of activism in Iran is quite high?
Yes.
Just like in some other countries, it's not the same if you protest in countries like Turkey or in countries like Hungary, and if you protest in some, let's say, countries with more open structures of authority, which doesn't mean, of course, that repression is absent from the so-called liberal democracies whatsoever. But do you think that in 2024, more people or less, or maybe to put it this way, do you think that every new wave of mobilization encourages and empowers more people, or the process goes vice versa?
I would...
or the fear
okay,
prevails?
yes. First, I would like to kind of compare the 2022 with the 2019 protests, because that was also very, very crucial moment, a turning point regarding the massification of the protests in Iran. It was also more than 90 cities was involved into November 2019. And unfortunately, it was very brutally suppressed. In 3 days, they cut the internet, and that during the 3 days, there was a kind of estimated around 1,500 people got killed. That is far much more than even the momentum in 2022. So basically,
1,500.
Yes.
Okay.
It is, of course, none of them acknowledge, but I think Amnesty International kind of said about more than 1,000 in 3 days, and I think it's it is possible. So can you imagine that 2009, just 2-3 years before September 2022, such a brutality happened. Many executed during these 3 years in between due to the many stuff, political issues, but also not necessarily political issues. So the fear was there, but still 2022 happened. So I would...
Was it more massive?
Yes.
It more people in 2022?
Yes, of course.
Okay.
And it was the first time, because that one, it was, I would say that we can frame it more about the economical claim, class-based issues was in 2019. There was not demanding for that, for example, of the gender equality, and there was not demanding of the, of course, national or ethnic minorities' demands were not there, or at least it was not accentuated as the class issues and economic hardship was there. But 2022 was successful, and that's the things that I connect, because of that, connected with the transnational feminist movement, or transnational feminist politics, that they call it transversal politics, that could bridge different people with different history of the struggles and oppression together. And this potential was to in these issues of gender violence, state femicide of the Kurdish women, kind of connect all this struggle together. First of all, because it was killed on the hand of the hijab police. It was a woman from a marginalized group in Iran, from a Kurdish background, and belonged to working class. So all this element was in this state femicide that make it as a unique one to kind of break this frame of, as I mentioned once, the frame of seeing politics or doing politics of fear. So affective-driven politics of, or the magic of this revolutionary momentum for me is that fear was not anymore the frame that we understand the world and the politics. And I don't know whether it's gonna happen again or not, that the fear is not working anymore. But at least I'm hopeful, because we had 2019 and then 2022 happen. So it seems that each time there are more people that kind of going beyond this frame of understanding the life and politics, and they kind of striving for the better future for all. And I try to be hopeful that this day is also coming again, but this time hopefully with a better result, I would say that. But another thing that is, if it's possible to add, is that the people also learn from the previous experiences. Not only from 2019, that they were, because of they happened and they were not ready for that brutality. This time they were at least mentally more prepared for the situation that happened. But also the collective.
Have they developed some mechanisms of, for instance, helping, providing special support to those imprisoned, legal support, etc.? Are there such groups?
There were the group, as I said, that I think there was kind of the 2019's kind of influential in a sense that they kind of try to connect and have a network of different people in different area of the profession to help each other. For example, I heard by as an interview that I did with an activist in Iran that her sister was in the as a nurse working in the hospital in Tehran, and in 2019 they just faced lots of the bodies that they came and they couldn't help them basically, and many of them of course got killed later. And this time they were ready in a sense that they started before 2022 start to talk about this issue that happened 2019 with their colleagues, and that they talk about how they organize each other if it's happen again. And that time they were more successful in 2022. So past incidents, tragic incidents, in a sense, help for the future, in a sense, assist people for the future. I would say that the same thing is for the 1979 revolution. So this collective memory was very alive in 2022, in both good sense or advantage of revolutionary momentum, but also as a kind of disadvantage. Advantage because the moment that happened, the 2022 September uprising, everybody called them revolution, because they know what is the differences between what is happening in 2022 with the ones that happened in 2009, what happened in 2019, what happened in 2017. It was the similar mobilization of the 1979, and it was the collective memory that was alive. And in a country that constantly by both the government and state and oppositions, liberal, nationalist, monarchist oppositions, talk and frame the revolution as a, the worst things happened to the country, and blame the revolutionaries because of the 1979. Backing to this idea of the revolution was, for me, is a very, very important step forward, or kind of turning point. And it's one of the reasons that I still, despite it was not kind of successful to topple the regime, I would call it a revolution because the people call it revolution. And I think it's important to give a credit to that, and it is different from the previous wave. And also the Arab revolutions was very effective, very vividly there. Arab revolutions, in some sense, change our relations with our regions as well. So before that, it was not, we haven't known that much about what's happening around. There we have the very official understanding of the Middle East, and everything's connected through the government and the educational system to the Islamic world. We haven't any kind of direct access or kind of dialogue with the peoples in the region. But all of the sudden, or maybe because of it was post-2009 for us, the Arab revolutions give also hope to us, and a new identity also born in Iran, that the people call themselves Middle Eastern. It was not there before. And young generation particularly really wanted to connect with this new fresh air in the region that is different from the past. Mm-hmm. And
but then how to avoid the scenario if we try to think about
what's happening there?
About Iran after the current state of affairs, how to avoid the scenario, in other words, how not to become the another part, even though Iran is a special context and it's a special country with so many respects, but how to avoid going back to the pre-revolutionary state of affairs in terms of geopolitics and the influence?
Yes, I of course I don't have an answer, but I think, and in the middle of the...
Is that somewhere in the back of the mind of activists who are struggling now?
Of course. And at the time also, as far as I know, and I was listening to the different people, they know that if they really want to have a change, it is regional. It could not be something just limited to Iran. And it is both among the activists, Arab activists, Turkish activists, and also Iranian was shared that it is also domino effect, but at the same time very connected. We cannot talk about issues of the ethnic minorities in Iran without thinking about the same things about the Kurdish movement in Turkey or in Iraq. We cannot talk about, new colonialism, new kind of the intervention of the regional power like Iran in Syrian war. We cannot think about what's happening now in Gaza without, thinking about both sides of what is the rule of the people and movement in the region, but at the same time the Arab and Islamic Republic kind of intervention in the region. And at the same time we kind of not see the politics outside or beyond the frame that they provide for us. That is the national state way of seeing the words. And I think there are the seeds there, but I don't know whether at the end it's kind of flourished or not. But the hope is there that to kind of through this kind of more connections, more collaborations, more understanding, more involving each are, that because of our destiny is kind of the common and shared, we come up with a new frame of politics that is more regional. And I think it is the rule of diaspora in a sense, progressive diaspora, because the peoples in that country are now suffering from coercions, from discriminations, from dealing with everyday life and everyday life politics. But I think it is on us as exiled peoples, or not necessarily exiled people, but many of us exiled people, to do differently.
Thank you so much. I have another 100 questions, but let's hope that you'll be back to Belgrade soon. And
I really hope. Thank you for this discussion and conversation. I really enjoy.
And thank you so much for sharing your insights and your thoughts about Iran. Thank you.